entrance to the National Assembly. Minister, a very good afternoon to you. The tie might have been blue, but this was a very upbeat budget.
There's every reason to be upbeat. South Africa is a great country. We're not an economy that's collapsing or anything like that. I think we make too much of the negatives. We need to make more of the positives that we have. And we need to encourage one another to do better and to take up the opportunities that are available.
You seemed quite choked up towards the end of the speech, thanking the President for the opportunity to serve the country, particularly when you talked about the support from your family. Was this your last budget speech?
It was the last budget speech for this 5-year term, and I tend to get a bit emotional when I'm talking about personal matters, but there's no relationship between last budget speech and being emotional. So, one is human.
If you were asked to serve again as Finance Minister in the new administration, will you?
But as I said earlier to all of the journalists, that's a question the President will answer.
But you will be making yourself available.
I'm going to repeat my answer to you, which is the President will tell you after the elections are over.
Okay. You talked about a new economic order. The economists we spoke to this afternoon weren't sure that by page 33 of the budget speech that you'd outlined that sufficiently enough.
Well, then the economists don't read the National Development Plan, which actually says we need to go forward. So firstly, it says it's an order where on the supply side we need enough energy, we need to fix our logistics system, or rather make it more efficient. Thirdly, we need more skills within our economy. Fourthly, we need to look for new opportunities in the new technology world to build on the innovation that we're already capable of. We need to also look back a little bit into our history and say, why aren't we getting more black people participating more effectively in the economy? And that's the new order as well. And it's an order where there's greater agility in both the private and public sector in order to take up opportunities, for example, on the African continent, but also develop the muscle to compete with the rest of the world. So these are substantial changes. And the structure of our economy. Mining has been mining for 100 years. Mining is still the main, or products of mining are still the main exports. They bring in 50% of our exports. And the main revenue that we earn from the world as well. How long do we want to sustain that, or do we want to diversify it? And therefore you hear my colleagues and others talking about industrialization, which is a word that's used throughout the continent as well. So it's there, I think, if you look for it. And the more important thing is not just to nitpick about these sorts of things, but to say, how do we get some coherence into what we mean by the order? I thought we were building and do have a fair amount of consensus around the National Development Plan. Let's get going. But don't keep denying that there's work to do. And by no means is anybody in government, including myself, saying that we have a perfect system. But we have formidable achievements in a very short period of time. Look at anybody's history in that regard. Acknowledge those achievements. Acknowledge that they are a foundation for the future, not the answer to the future. And we've still got to build the answers for the future.
You had some harsh words for those, particularly in London and Washington, New York particularly, that like to blame emerging markets for their troubles. And it's talk that hurts our economy, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. As I said, we have a profound commitment to multilateralism. We have a profound commitment to making multilateral organizations work. We understand from our 2009 experiences as a globe that unless we cooperate, both emerging markets and developed economies, neither of us is actually safe in this world, so to speak. But at different stages, we all going to require each other's help. And in the earlier period, it's the emerging markets that stimulated their economies, that created more opportunities for more investment, and took responsibility for 50% of the growth for the last, say, 4 years or so. And what's important is that domestic political agendas, where you want to deflect attention from yourself, shouldn't be the key issue here. The key issue is still, we've got to collectively find answers to grow the global economy beyond its below 4% mark to above the 6% mark. And to do that, all of us in each of our countries need to undertake changes. And it's a bit of old-style colonialism to point fingers and say, you guys in the emerging markets, get your house in order. Of course we know we have challenges, all of us, but which developed country doesn't?
You were talking about the global economic recovery, and amidst that recovery that there were risks for South Africa. What worries you?
Well, it's not really a worry. In life you've got to always understand your strengths, but also understand where risks might come from. They might never materialize, but if they do materialize, A, you must understand them, and B, you must have some contingency plan. So clearly we all understood that tapering of quantitative easing will bring some turbulence, but I think that turbulence went beyond what it should have been because of early miscommunication or lack of proper communication. Had we handled that better, we might have been in a different position. Secondly, the idea of negative spillovers is not, on the one hand we know we're interconnected, but on the other hand, big economies often think that they can do things without reference to others. So in the G20 meeting in Australia, I think there might have been, according to the communique at least, I wasn't there, some appreciation that we've got to coordinate our efforts, that we need to talk to each other more often and take policy positions that would help each other. In South Africa's case, I think, as we gave you the numbers, investment in Africa from South African business is second to any other developing country, or number 2. And government is doing more and more to support that kind of investment, which also means better returns in terms of balance of payments on our side as well. So we got to keep an eye on the currency situation. We've got to keep an eye on the narrative about emerging markets. We've got to keep an eye on the European banks because they're still not fully secure, despite whatever anybody says. The too big to fail phenomenon as far as multinational banks are concerned is a matter that the Financial Stability Board is still addressing, not adequately yet. So we don't have resolution mechanisms, as they call them, in place at this point in time. And if the recovery in the US, for example, doesn't sustain itself into the future, that could be a risk for us as well, because it becomes a negative rather than a positive narrative. But as I said, risks don't necessarily happen. In the meantime, far more important than the risks is what are we going to do ourselves in order to build the opportunities that we have.
All right, Finance Minister, I know you're an extremely busy man this afternoon with a range of interviews to do. Thank you very much indeed for your time here on eNCA. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, who in that speech offering that 9.5 billion rand in tax relief and indeed keeping the fuel levy increases to within inflation this year, evidently very mindful of the tough times we're all enduring. Nakiwe, back to you.
Know more about your world.
eNCA.com